Memorial Day, it's this old holiday that somehow survives. God only knows how. Some people remember when the 4th of July was a real holiday. Some people even remember Labor Day. I remember Arbor Day, but they're all pretty much gone. But Memorial Day still survives, and it survives just by ordinary people. There's nobody out promoting it. There are no gifts connected to it, maybe some flowers sometimes. But nobody's pushing this holiday. It could just fade away. One year we'd go and there wouldn't be anybody else there at the cemetery on Monday morning. Lake Wobegon there is, so far there always is, and it's always pretty much the same as it was when I was a child. That old VFW honor guard comes marching in, men with sore feet, carrying heavy rifles, wearing uniforms that are too tight for them. And these good men have done 3 Memorial Day services already and banged these rifles 3 times, and now they're going to do this 4th, and they'll be off to do 5 more today. They're tired old men marching in, but they're proud. They stand, and we have the invocation, and we have a speech, usually a horrible speech. And the men stand there. They know too much. You see, they've actually seen war. They know the brutality of it, the confusion, the craziness, the stink of war. And so the oratory about the war has no meaning or effect on them whatsoever. They stand there and they wait for their chance to fire their rifles in salute, and then get back into the car and drive off to the next little town where they will do this all again, where they will hear another child recite, "Breathes there a man with soul so dead, who never to himself hath said, This is my own, my native land, whose heart hath ne'er within him burned, as homeward his footsteps he hath turned from wandering on some foreign strand." And some other child will recite, "O captain, my captain, our fearful trip is done. The ship is weathered every rack, the prize we sought is won. But oh, the crimson drops of red, where on the deck my captain lies fallen cold and dead." Or sometimes, "In Flanders field the poppies grow, row on row." Children reciting poems for wars that took place long, long before their time. In Lake Wobegon, when you got into the 5th grade, it was your assignment to go to Memorial Day and stand there as a class, and all of us were told by Miss Molenbrock to memorize Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, knowing that we would not know until the moment before which one of us would be tapped to recite Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. This was Miss Molenbrock's way of getting us to focus on the Gettysburg Address, which you wouldn't do if you knew it was going to be a choral recitation. Nobody would learn it. But if you thought about that her finger might tap you on the shoulder, and you would step forward and would be all up to you at this moment, then you started to think about it. Some members of the 5th grade class figured that 1 chance in 30, they could deal with that. Not bad odds. And other people tucked a little index card in their pocket, just have a little insurance. But some of us worried about this. Our aunts and uncles were there at Memorial Day. It was all up to us. And when it came up to that moment, after the Ladies Sextet had sung "This Is My Country" in their horrible, ruined soprano voices, we took a deep breath, and Miss Molenbrock walked behind the class, and you felt her hand tap you. Me. 87 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. Those brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far beyond our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living rather, to be here dedicated to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is for us, rather, to be here dedicated to that great task that lies before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they paid the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. And your aunts and uncles let out a great sigh of relief. And you stepped back, and then it was time to sing Eternal Father, Strong to Save, and it was time for the bugler to play taps. He was up in the limb of that tree over there, and the honor guard had to be reminded not to fire towards that tree. Otherwise, taps would not sound so pure and good. The most memorable Memorial Day speech that any of them had ever heard was years before, when Clarence Bunsen stood up and said simply, if there were a time when words were inappropriate, when silence was the most articulate speech, it would be here and now. Better than any oratory, better than any speech or poem, for you and I to stand 2 minutes in silence and look out at those whom we know and those whom we do know, not know, and think of all that they did for us. There was this long silence that year, a long silence, and you heard the wind in the leaves, and you heard birds, you heard the bugler who was practicing a few notes on his bugle in the limb of that distant tree. You heard screen doors slap far away in town, and dogs bark, and tires on soft asphalt. And then you heard weeping from the honor guard, these old VFW vets, that old master sergeant who had no nose. His bridge of his nose had gone. He'd fallen off a roof and fallen right onto a rain barrel, and it caught him right there in the bridge of the nose. So when you looked at him from the side, you could see both of his eyes at one time. And Mel Magandance got out a hanky, and he was weeping. Mel Magandance, who has this big mark on his forehead. He used to tease his little brother Ronnie mercilessly when they were kids. And one day his older sister Diane picked up a claw hammer and just planted it right in Mel's forehead, so that when she let go of it, it just hung there from his forehead. He's been a very sweet, decent, kind person ever since. They all stood there weeping in this 2 minutes of silence that Clarence Bunsen made his speech. They all shook his hand afterward, told him it was the best speech that had ever been given. Well, he was a little embarrassed, of course, because he knew too well that as he stood there, wondering who was going to give the speech this year, and Pastor Inkfist poked him, and Clarence realized, it's me. I forgot. I have forgotten Memorial Day. I have forgotten these men. I am the worst person in the world. And he almost begged for people's forgiveness. And then he had this steadying thought, it's not all up to you. It's not all about you. And so the man who had forgotten to write a speech stepped forward and said a sentence in behalf of silence.